Good morning and welcome to the Art History Festival. My name is Christina Bradstreet. I'm the head of programs at the Association for Art History. And welcome to our week-long Art History Festival. So this is a week of events celebrating art history. Local to global is our theme. And the festival is organised by the Association for Art History in the UK and is taking place across the UK and beyond in partnership with museums and galleries and other cultural institutions, with events happening both online and in person. So we have about 90 events and 80 partners for this festival this year. So I'm really delighted that we're able to have this panel discussion on the development of art history and audiences in the UAE. It felt really important to us to cover the Middle East. And of course, there have been so many exciting developments in the UAE art world, which we're going to get into today. So I'm going to hand over now to Sophie Kazan, who has wonderfully put together this panel discussion. I'm really grateful to her. Welcome, Sophie, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina, and welcome, everyone. I'm Sophie Kazan. I'm on the Higher Education Committee at the Association for Art History, an art and architecture historian, a writer and a lecturer at Falmouth University and Notre Dame University in London, and an honorary fellow at Leicester University. This panel discussion is entitled "An Art Not Made to be Understood: Learning from the Development of Art and Art Audiences in the United Arab Emirates, the UAE. Museums in Abu Dhabi, art fairs and sales in Dubai, and biennials in Sharjah. We hear about the UAE from time to time, and it's not often that we get to put the pieces together and really understand what makes up the country's unique art ecosystem, the work of its local contemporary artists, and its own art audiences. So the UAE is a union of 7 emirates or sheikdoms or regions. The largest of these is Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Sharjah. And our speakers today come from a different region. Manal Ataya is a senior advisor and was previously Director General of Sharjah Museums Authority. Munir Al-Sayeh is an independent curator and founder of Dirwaza Cultural Lab in Abu Dhabi. And Asma Shabibi is the co-founder and director of the Lori Shabibi Gallery in Dubai. You may recognize the work of many of her artists from international fairs such as Frieze Masters in London and the Frieze Sculpture in Regent's Park a few years ago. So many people work in the UAE art institutions, and here I include myself, since I worked in the UAE for a number of years, are passionate about the art and artists, the speed of change, the range of possibilities found by creatives in the UAE. For one, I've written a book about it. It's due out next month. And so especially for the Association for Art History Festival 2024, we've got the opportunity to learn from some key players in the UAE art scene, 3 extremely accomplished women whom I will have introduced to you now broadly, and I'll introduce them each in greater detail before each takes the floor. And they explain what they'll do. They will explain what they do and also what they're passionate about. So first is Manal Ataya. She's an accomplished museums professional with 20 years senior level expertise in museum development, cultural heritage, management, cultural diplomacy. From 2008 to 2023, she was at the helm of Sharjah Museums Authority. She led a diverse team of 700 staff working in a network of 16 museums, and that's for a population of just over 1.5 million people in Sharjah. These museums encompass a wide range of collections from modern and contemporary Arab art, Islamic art, Gulf heritage, science, marine life, and UAE archaeology. She is now an advisor for museums to His Highness Sheikh Dr. Al-Qasimi, ruler of Sharjah, and she's involved in cultural policy making and the development of new museum policies. She serves a diverse array of boards throughout the Arab world and holds many very prestigious international awards. She's also a graduate of the University of Harvard. Manal, over to you.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Thank you for the introduction, Sophie. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I will start my presentation if you give me one moment. Okay. All right, there we go. So thank you again for having me. I think it's a very important discussion that we're going to have today to really try to understand this pretty amazing arts ecosystem that we have in the United Arab Emirates. It has grown tremendously, but it has certain origins and certain of the different emirates and certain, let's say, institutions and organizations that are really vital or played a critical role in where we have gotten to today, in terms of our understanding and our appreciation, our celebration of a lot of artists from the region, but also internationally, and that connection between us and the rest of the world, which is very important. I've worked in Sharjah for 19 years, and Sharjah really is, I think, and the UAE in general, is a great place to emphasize the building of this really vibrant cultural scene and the essential roles it's played in developing the Arab and international cultural knowledge and creative landscape that we have. And it's really evident in institutions that we have here in Sharjah in particular, but also in other emirates. So the Sharjah Museums Department was established, in 2006. Its mission was to deliver the highest museum standards in preserving collections and enhancing the appreciation of culture and learning through our exhibitions, our educational and community programs. As mentioned by Sophie, we have a number of museums. We actually have a couple more. They're just managed by other people, thankfully. But we have quite a few that we have to manage ourselves. And they are about 16, 17 museums. And many of them are, on the way, future plans for future museums in the coming years. As you can see, the collection is extremely diverse, and it really reflects the ruler, His Highness Sheikh Dr. Sultan bin Mohammed Al Qasimi. He holds 2 doctorates in history and political geography, and then, of course, has over a dozen honorary doctorates. But he himself has always been very passionate and interested in the history of Sharjah, the Gulf, and the region. He has a personal interest in collections, and particularly in culture, and how these different sort of collections can work together to really tell a bigger story. So, of course, if you can imagine, when he was here starting to build a lot of these institutions in the early 1980s, there were many things that were on his mind that he wanted to do. And then since that time, they have continued now over decades later. So these are really important things to mention. And I will mention some of those very quickly. So first, there's the archaeology. I think we can start from archaeology. There was excavations happening in the late 70s, early 80s, and this is where one of the first museums in Sharjah is created and established in 1993, and that's the Sharjah Archaeology Museum. So it's a pretty old museum, and after that, other elements started to come to play. His Highness was collecting Islamic decorative arts, and then also a lot of cartography, documents, things that he was actually working on for research purposes for many of his publications. So, slowly these things start to grow. And he also has his own interest in education in particular, and wanting to make sure that the community and the public has access to as much as possible that they can learn from the museums. So this is where you can see the attention put on children in terms of the establishment of the Sharjah Discovery Center, and that was over 25 years ago also. The Sharjah Science Museum, again, over 25 years ago, was built, and then other museums, different heritage museums, again, to really focus on preserving also UAE heritage through its buildings and its collections. So you can see through this sort of mix here how much there is in variety. Moving on, just to let you know sort of what our main values or goals are at the Museums Authority. We're here to preserve cultural material. We're dedicated to lifelong learning. Research and disseminating that knowledge through our publications is extremely important. There's a huge focus on national pride, and that's through the celebration of Emirati heritage and culture, and preserving, as I mentioned, many of these houses and other forms of cultural material from the UAE. Community engagement is critical for what we do. So we engage with as much of our community as possible, with really children, school children and families being at the core of that. And of course, other groups follow. We celebrate diversity through all the different types of collaborations and international partnerships, and what we offer in terms of community programs for different types of communities within the larger community of Sharjah. And then, of course, in a way that relates to accessibility and inclusion and how important that is for us as well. We need to always ensure that we are being active in promoting this in everything that we are doing in Sharjah. So here was the archaeology museum that I had mentioned earlier, and how important it was for His Highness to supplement actually the UAE curriculum. So much of what we have in our various museums, this is Al Hisn. This is a fort that was restored, partially restored, when it was almost torn down, actually, while His Highness was studying abroad. He came back to stop the demolition of this very important building, which he grew up in actually as a child, and now actually is a critical part of the history to explain the Qasimi family, the ruling family, who they are, the family tree, and what this building was and how it was central to the community at the time, over 200 years ago. It's very important to note that, you know, making even visits to museums became compulsory in Sharjah decades ago. His Highness, you know, informed the school zones that they had to bring students, they had to come visit these different museums and learn as much as they could, because he knew that a lot of what was being taught in the schools in the UAE in general did not cover many of these areas, or at least not into the depth that we could offer with the collections and the resources that we had. So we've been very good at designing and creating and developing programs for children and families, and also helping train teachers to use the museums as a resource and to fill these gaps in whatever subject they teach. We pretty much can cover it in every single museum we have, or even, you know, as I said, numerous different subject matters can be taught in one museum itself. Here's another beautiful example of a restored house that's very, very important to history of Sharjah as well. Our Maritime Museum, a very important part of the UAE heritage of the region and the Qasimi family, as well as maritime history and the Qasimi military, well, would be marine, maritime, I'd say, yeah, would it be military force that they had at the time, with the ships that they had in the 1800s, and how important that was and critical for what was later to happen in the history of the UAE, in terms of its ability to stop the invasion of the Portuguese and other countries that wanted to come and take hold of Sharjah's very strategic location as a trading route between East and West. Moving on, this is our Islamic Museum of Islamic Civilization, another beautiful building. Again, this was used to be a souk, actually, had a lot of stores, and these are storefronts, many of those windows that you can see. Later, this was abandoned when the you know, sort of the new concept of the mall started to come about. And so this place stayed pretty empty for a while His Highness decided what he might want to do with it. He was thinking to turn it into a library, but then as the Islamic collection grew, it turned out this would probably be the best place for it, and it has been. It was inaugurated in 2008 when I had started my job, and it was a really wonderful project, and it's truly beautiful now. We've hosted some absolutely amazing exhibitions in this space. This is the Art Museum, probably one that I will talk about quite a bit later in this presentation. It was also inaugurated many years ago, and it's, again, over 25 years old. I like to emphasize this because often the understanding of a lot of what we have in terms of cultural institutions is that this all sort of happened 10 or maybe 15 years ago, but that's not the case. There are a number of institutions in the UAE that were established in the 80s, but the majority of those main institutions were developed in Sharjah and established in Sharjah and have been very active in Sharjah since the early 1980s. And I will mention a few of those that I think are very important to mention. And that would be the Emirates Fine Arts Society, and many people have now heard about it because of the different artists sort of that are now well known as UAE artists, including the late Hassan Sharif, who's part of that artistic collective of people who were working and exhibiting and meeting at the Fine Arts Society, but also that His Highness has been involved in, besides creating this museum many years ago, also established the Sharjah Book Fair, the Sharjah Arab Theatre Festival. There's so many. Sharjah Biennial, of course, and that was in 1993, and then later there was a new reiteration of it in 2003 with Sheikh Harhour at the helm of that. But to imagine that you have an art biennial in the UAE in 1993, and then you have a book fair in 1982 that it started, a calligraphy biennial in 2004, and the Arab Theatre Festival I mentioned in 1984. This shows a lot of early establishment of very important and critical institutions that are still active and still play such a huge role in what they do, and not to mention all the other things like the fine arts colleges and things like that we have in Sharjah. So the question, I know also that we were asked when we were going to give our presentations, where it was about what we were passionate about, and there's a lot that I am and passionate about in the work that I do, but I think just for the sake of this presentation, I would probably say that there's two primarily that I would like to focus on. There's that for education and accessibility, and we have made it, as I said, compulsory for schools to come, but also we look at how we can develop much more programs that really work at diversifying our audiences. So we have been really involved in the last 10 to 15 years in expanding what we do for people from the disability groups, hearing impaired, the blind, autistic community. So there's a lot that we do to make sure that we cater to as much people as possible, as well as marginalized groups, people who sometimes in particular cannot come to museums. And we literally look for those people. So who can't come? For example, the people who are ill, so cancer patients. Can we go to the hospitals and sort of bring them experiences of workshops and art, and hopefully that can be something that can help them and help them with their families to have something fun to do, something relaxing to do. These have been rolled out in other programs we've done with inmates in correctional facilities in Sharjah, but also with the Museum Express initiative that I started about 10 years ago, which was a fitted out exhibition on a coach bus that goes to areas that are more rural in parts of Sharjah, where schools are unable to come to the center because of the long distance with the school buses. So we are able to go to them and bring them an exhibition that they can look at of sort of all of what we have, the diverse collection of what we have, and then they can also have on-site workshop and often meet many famous artists that are kind enough to develop and don't sort of what's the word, give their time to us, to be able to volunteer their time to do this for all these young kids who often are kids who say to us, we have never ever been to a museum, or we don't know anything about art. So this is really amazing. And these tend to be public schools. So we've been very proud of those initiatives. Moving on quickly, because I know we have not much time here. This is the Sharjah Art Museum. It's quite iconic. People recognize it, you know, with its sort of stylized wind towers, and there's the Fine Arts Society. You can see it in the lower image, literally across the street. So there's always been this physical as well as, you know, symbolically very close connection between the two. Talking about exhibitions and things that we have done, my other passion is highlighting and providing the platform for Arab artists and for artists who have unfortunately been unrecognized and not given what they deserve in terms of exposure. When we had this first exhibition in 2009, just a few years after we were established, this is sort of how I think a lot of the West saw this part of the world from an Orientalist point of view. And we did bring this exhibition because we do have an Orientalist collection, which is really beautiful. However, it's a very different Orientalist collection than maybe some of the other works that people are familiar with. The Orientalist collection that His Highness has acquired over the years really focuses on the beautiful landscapes and architecture of that time, rather than sort of imagined scenes of the harem and all of that kind of thing. In this exhibition, you know, we have some beautiful collection art that from Sharjah that we were able to include in this very important exhibition by the Tate that traveled to the US, Istanbul, and then to us. But moving on, this is where we're talking about focusing on Arab artists and people and artists who have been so active and have been doing such amazing work for decades, but have never been given a retrospective. And this is where the idea for coming up with the concept of the Lasting Impression series started. This came a little bit later after we were showing so we do different types of shows. We have shows that are international collaborations and bring works from all over the world and of different artists of different nationalities and different, you know, origins. We bring in exhibitions of a lot of Arab artists when impossible, or collections from different Arab organizations. Like today, we will have an opening from the National Gallery of Jordan, for example, and that has a lot of great collection of modern Arab artists. However, the Lasting Impression series is one that we developed again over about 10 years ago to specifically highlight those artists who have not had a retrospective. These are artists who have been at least working for 30 plus years, but have been unfortunately overlooked. And this takes me to, sorry, this is Abdel Nasser Ghanem, one of his great shows that we brought as an example. Here quickly is a few examples of the Lasting Impression series. We've had Abdel Qadir Reyes, UAE artist, who up until we had his retrospective, I don't know now, 15 years ago or so, 12 years ago, he had never had one. Baya Muhiddin, very famous artist from Algeria, never had a retrospective outside or any show outside of Algeria. And we had that recently into 2021. Thoraya al-Baghsami from Kuwait, very famous artist as well, never shown actually retrospective in Kuwait, in her home country, let alone anywhere else. So we were lucky to also show her work. And then the Lasting Impression series also with Ismail Shammout and the late Ismail Shammout and his wife Tamam al-Akhal, first time to ever see her artwork. And then Sami Halabi was one of our more recent ones. Again, quite a shock. Sami Halabi is a very famous artist, but did not have a retrospective up until the one we gave her last year. So this is just to give you an idea of sort of the different types of exhibitions that we've had. I think I'm running out of time. I'll just mention here another one from Lasting Impression series, Ismail Khayyat, Kurdish Iraqi artist. This is the Baya Muhiddin, and then Sami Halabi, who showed some interesting works. I wanted to just highlight those three before I close, just to mention them, because these are particularly exhibitions where to show the variety of the types of artists that we want to show. We have been very careful to say, you know, can we show more female artists as well as male artists? Can we show artists who come from North Africa as well as the Gulf, as well as the Levant? Can we show artists who come from different ethnic backgrounds? So in the case of Baya, for example, she is oh, sorry, I've lost the word now. But it'll come to me. But from different backgrounds, and so this way we can try to be more inclusive of who we're showing, and also the kinds of work that we show that often are not shown anywhere else. And in the case, for example, of Sami Halabi, a lot of her work on the massacre that happened, a very famous one that happened in Palestine in the 70s, in the 50s, that she had been documenting for so many years, was something that no institution would ever show, but we were able to give her a whole space to show all of these unbelievable drawings and paintings and sketches that she did. So, you know, to close, I think it's just important to say that, you know, it's been very important to go through this journey of highlighting artists, making them visible, ensuring that people understand the connections to a lot of their work to historical contexts and historical events, political events, things that are going on in the region. But also that so many of what also we hear is that, you know, we limit certain things or we censor certain things, but actually quite the opposite. So much of what we show are things that have been censored in the West, things that people don't want to necessarily see or talk about, but we have been, as much as we can, growing and opening up these discussions and dialogues about all these different topics, whether it's environmental issues or political issues or social issues that are being demonstrated through these art forms. So it's been, you know, a great journey. And I think, again, as I always think of museums as these agents of social sort of change, and we have to remain relevant to our communities, and just crucial to always engage in any way that we can. Thank you for your time. Sorry, I went over.
No problem at all. Thank you so much, Manal, for showing us such a wide array of important exhibitions. And I hope that we'll be able to take up some of those themes that you touched on, and for showing your passions as well. That was fantastic. Next, we're going to hear from Munira Al-Sayeh. She's worked on numerous projects for organizations such as NYU Abu Dhabi, Abu Dhabi Art, the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. Not only are her projects and programs and exhibitions creative and diverse, but also curious, critical, and profound. She founded Dirwaza Curatorial Lab in 2020, focusing on grassroots initiatives and narrative reclamation in the Gulf. She's an independent and free-thinking curator and cultural instigator. Behind me, in fact, is a picture from one of her first, I think, exhibition at Warehouse 421, Bain, The In-Between, which is, I think, the work of Manal Dawayan, whose work is presented this year in the National Pavilion of Saudi Arabia. Anyway, I leave the floor to you, Munira.
Thank you, Sophie. Manal, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I will be echoing a lot of what Manal said and adding on to that in the presentation that I will be sharing. So what I'll be presenting is curatorial practices as roles of narrative reclamation. So my practice revolves around curating exhibitions and looking at how, you know, these spaces begin to reclaim particular narratives or correct narratives or add on to narratives that are already existing. What happens when culture is not spoken about from the inside out? So as we know, the Middle East for a very long time is always spoken on behalf of. And so what we begin to see what we begin to see overall is this sense of sort of assumptions that are placed and put onto the scene. An example of this are all of these different titles from different news spaces that really talk about the Middle East in this way, where as though, history has just started, or as though culture has just found itself within this space and within this sphere. And so when you have all of this and you have all of this noise, how do you place yourself in a particular position where you can kind of correct this information? So what we ended up having in the early 2000s is an influx of discussion around all of the new museums that are opening in, and a lot of the things or a lot of the titles would be very belittling in their mannerisms. For example, Art Dubai is more than just a fair. You have things around individuals who are just promoting and regurgitating the same kind of conversation, which we still hear today. Moving on. So with that, what ends up happening is there's this sense that culture can only exist if and when international standards are within the space. Actually, international standards are defined by sort of a Western culture or a Western gaze. And so there's this idea that institutions are going to rescue the space, or institutions are going to rescue this place of new history, and not really disregarding the fact that there's a lot here. There's a lot, as discussed by Manal even. Here on the far right, we have an image of Dr. Sultan, Sheikh Dr. Sultan Qasimi, opening up one of the exhibitions at the Fine Arts Society. Below this is an archival image of the Cultural Foundation, which I will go a little bit more in depth in at a later stage. So what happens here? What happens when culture and language no longer merge? So what's being introduced onto the scenes via these international standards is the role of the English language almost as the main role. What we've begun to see, or what we are seeing, is a lot of the texts around culture are written in English and then translated to Arabic. So these are particularities that are very specific to the time that we're in right now. And it's just a kind of a spectrum where people are trying to navigate through. So obviously inclusivity is really important, and English has become the language that everybody does speak, given the realm that the UAE is a space and a sphere that is very, very diverse. So the question becomes here, how do we look, or how can we look, or how can we present the UAE differently? How can we readdress the starting point of the UAE? So as opposed to us starting now, how can we look at what has happened, and then from that build on what we are doing to kind of, with all integrity, give back to the communities that have begun their movements and their studies and their research, and have added to this cultural sphere that we belong in. So falling into history, I'd like to start off this with a quote by the late Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan. A nation without a past is a nation without a present or a future. I think that's the simplest way to really highlight what my goal is as an independent curator and as the founder of Darwaza, is to really kind of connect. What ends up happening is, with so much growth and at the speed of the growth that's taking place, there are gaps, and these gaps need to be filled. You have to jump in onto these gaps, and you also have to connect, because if there's no kind of cycles, then there's no sense. So what happens when starting and turning points within our histories are overlooked or made unimportant? So, looking at particular spaces that have been here from the 1980s, why aren't those talked about and just deemed unimportant? Is it because they don't fall under this international excellence kind of space or sphere? how can we reconfigure the art historical compass away from the Western canon of art history? I think here also, language becomes a big part when you are talking to the older community of artists, being able to reference the things that they're referencing, which is very relevant to the space and the study and the language, the Arabic language, is very different to the way that creatives are working today, where they have a wide of understanding. There's some things or some histories that are made somehow more important than others. And then from that, how can we begin to fall into place? This question of falling into place is knowing your history, understanding the present, and understanding what you're trying to build on. Place becomes a guiding factor. It becomes the guiding factor. And, the role of locality and place within defining artistic movements, language, and exhibitions is essential. You take from what's around you. You take from the environment. You take from the social norms, the religions, various things, languages that surround you. You obviously take from the neighboring countries that have their space within the UAE. And here, you have spaces that really do look at place and understand place first, and then allow the communities to kind of exist around that. So the two ways that I'm looking at this is via institutions, and more that I will discuss, and then and exhibitions. So within institutions, you have, for example, Sharjah Art Foundation, Beit al-Shamsi, which is an old home that was repurposed to serve art exhibitions. You have M39, which is a newly opened space by the Sheikh Salama Foundation in the MENA in Abu Dhabi, which are 2 warehouses for creatives that have been repurposed. Those warehouses used to be warehouses for packaging. It's on the port. And it's a place that's very interesting and has always been interesting. And then, of course, you have Sirkal Avenue, which was the industrial area of Dubai, really quickly just kind of changed the vocabulary of the spaces that could be within that overall neighborhood. You have exhibitions that really, again, look at space or place as their root. You have the exhibitions in the UAE curated by Hur al-Qasimi, such as the show that was up at Venice and the shows that she puts up through SAF. But we cannot see them, which was curated by Maya Allison with Bana Qattan and Ala Idris, and Khalij Modern, also curated by Aisha Stobi. And these all kind of contextualized movements via understanding geography. You cannot remove one from the other, and you cannot really inherit things that are foreign within the sphere unless you can make sense of it or fold it into the overall narrative. And so these exhibitions really do highlight the way that place impacts practice. So understanding the roles, so we were saying at the very beginning that the UAE is very dynamic. Change is happening at a rapid pace, and we do hear a lot about these top-down institutions, and then what becomes the question, So you have to understand the roles. Obviously, there's a very full creative environment that we exist in. And here are some examples if we were to look at institutions from the perspective of the top down. So Emirates Fine Arts Society, which opened up in 1980, Cultural Foundation in Abu Dhabi in 1981, Sharjah Biennial 1993, Art Jamil 2003, Sharjah Art Foundation 2009, Minarat Saadiyat 2009, 421 2015, Sirkal Cultural Foundation 2015, amongst others. And so you have the structure of institutions, or the idea of how we're institutionalizing or formalizing what already is in existence here within the UAE. The space in between I'll actually end with, and I'll look at the ground up. So while all of these sort of formal spaces were formalizing, you started to see more and more artist collectives, artist studios, informal gatherings, independent curators, curatorial collectives, and things of such nature that were really organic, very much from the ground up. So what ended up happening was there was a top down and ground up approach, and then there's this space in between. So the space in between is a very interesting space, and that's a space that I look to fill in my practice through the Darwaza Curatorial Lab. And so this space in between is basically the bridge between the two forces. And what we have here is we have a lot of various collaborative spaces that really fill in the space. Fursa School, which happened in 2020 in response to COVID. The Ministry of Culture and Youth has a national grant program for culture and creativity. We have SEEF, which is a fellowship program for young artists. The Richard Mille Art Prize, which takes place at the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, that looks at artists from the region and supports them in an exhibition after they apply. And then there's a winner. 421's artistic and curatorial development programs are in collaboration with various institutions from the Global South. Art Jamil Library Circles, the Sarkal Foundation's research grants, Sharjah Art Foundation programming, Sharjah Architecture Triannual Programming, Cultural Foundation Residency Program, and the Cultural Foundation Mentorship Program. So these are where we see the ground up and the top down kind of coming together in a space that's still definitely formalized, but there to fill the gap. So I've been speaking about Darwaza, and I'm yet to introduce it properly. Darwaza started in 2020, and it started as a space that was being built for a few years, sort of conceptually. And I was really thinking about all of the subjects that I had discussed throughout this. So the role of language, the role of these institutions, what happens in this gap, and how do we find a space to build within that gap. And so Darwaza was born. And Darwaza is an engine for storytelling, collaboration, and narrative reclamation. As a creative incubator, Darwaza builds communities in the Gulf through mentorship, multidisciplinary research, archive building, critique, public programming, exhibition making. And in the word Darwaza is an Emirati word that takes from Farsi, Hindi, and Urdu. It exists actually across the places that are on the Arabian Peninsula, but closer to the water. The term is either Farsi, Hindi, or Urdu, or a mix of all. And it refers to a small door that's built within a larger door, and it's usually the external door of the traditional homes that existed in the region. So from this, really kind of jumping into my practice, and I guess what I'm passionate about is my practice, to answer that in short. We jump from this and look at how particular exhibitions have really set the stage for me to begin to look at how we can play with language, how we can introduce culture, and how we can reclaim narratives that otherwise are lost or are not spoken about. So Zemanna Replaying the 90s is one of the first exhibitions that Darwaza did. And it's an exhibition that looked at the 1990s. And through this exhibition, we were able to collect stories, revisit memories, show the dynamism of the UAE, in particular Abu Dhabi during this time, and really introduce interactivity with through art. While the Coffee Grounds Settle, Stories by Women in the UAE, was an exhibition with the UAE Embassy in Washington, D.C. We were called in to put together an exhibition by women for Emirati Women's Day. And so we came in, and there was a lot of push and pull around how we could bring this to life. But once the exhibition did come to life in DC, we had a lot of visitors. And during the same time, there were the pro-women's rights protests happening in Iran. And we had a lot of visitors coming in asking us like, oh, what is it like for you as a woman in the UAE? And just kind of confusing geographies. So art really plays a role in correcting narratives that otherwise are not there for the public to access in an easy manner. And so an exhibition really allows for that. And this particular exhibition had heavy programming around it. We had visitors that would come in daily. We had visitors that would come in to the programming, and just with full curiosity and I think an open mind, you can come in and you can really learn and take from the, from what the art is actually telling you. And to look back, we do always discuss place as a central role within the practice. Last but not least, Evaporating Suns, Contemporary Myths from the Arabian Gulf.
Thank you, Munira.
Yes. Is just the final exhibition, an exhibition that I'm happy to talk about a little bit later on. Took place in 2023 with KBHG in Basel, Switzerland. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very, very much. That was incredibly that was incredibly broad, and I'm very, very grateful to you. You raised so many important questions that I think will be taken up. Well, we have had a lot of questions on the Q&A, and I hope that if you have any questions for Munira or for the other panelists, you will put them into the Q&A now. Without further ado, I'm going to hand the presentations over to Asma Shabibi. She's the director and co-founder of the Laura Shabibi Gallery, a contemporary art gallery in Al Sirkal Avenue district of Dubai. She co-founded the gallery with William Laurie in 2011. Laura Shabibi Gallery works with many artists with focus on Middle East and the broader region. Asma and Will have sold work to Tate Modern, the Guggenheim, the Abu Dhabi Guggenheim, the British Museum, the LA County Museum, and many, many others. Nonetheless, Asma's involvement in the arts began earlier when she moved to Dubai in 2003. Born in Baghdad and raised in London, Kuwait, and Bahrain, Asma trained and practiced banking law in London and Singapore, working with numerous investment banks, and she is also the founder of Unit 21 Art Consulting. I could go on, but I know that we're stuck a little bit for time. I prefer to leave it to Asma, who I know has many exciting images of artworks from the gallery to show you. Over to you now, Asma.
Thank you. Just trying to switch on.
Brilliant. I'll just turn myself off.
Okay. Can you see the screen or no?
No, not yet.
Okay, we try again. Yep. It should be working now. I can't start my video because it says that the host has stopped it. So
I think Rebecca will try and sort that out for you.
yeah, I can't seem to switch it on.
Can you go down to the bottom and make it a full screen?
Yeah,
Brilliant.
do that.
Okay. No, yeah, perfect.
But I can't see myself on the. Okay, got it. Starting now. Here I am. Okay. Hello. I'm Asma Shabibi. I think, Sophie, you gave a great background to me. So that's something I don't really need to go through. Let's have a look. Sorry. So yes, the background to the gallery. As Sophie said, I was a lawyer. I always wanted to be a lawyer. So I never imagined I would be an art dealer or own a gallery in Dubai. But that's how life is. When I moved to Dubai, I continued to work as a lawyer, and then sort of realized it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And by chance, I attended the first Gulf Art Fair. At the time, it was called the Gulf Art Fair. It's now called Art Dubai. I think it's in its 17th year or something like that. I was blown away. It was an amazing event. This was very early days in Dubai. It was in 2007. And I really thought it was fantastic, and I wanted to immediately be part of it. So I did. I joined them as the managing director, and I worked there for 3 years, really building up a commercial art scene. And at the time, one of my roles was to raise funding and sponsorship. And it was really an exercise of information, because I would go to meetings with potential sponsors and nobody knew what an art fair was. They were like, can we buy art? What's the point of this? Why is this an important event? Why does it attract VIPs? And quite honestly, even for me, it was a lot of education in terms of how the whole art world ecosystem worked. And so I feel like I was growing and learning at the same time as the city was. And I was traveling to see all the other fairs, and really, I found it a really exciting sort of model. And I was quite fortunate to be working on that during the early periods of the development of the fair in Dubai. The fair grew very, very quickly. By the second year, we were in 2 rooms, and there were talks and all sorts of educational events. And then it started to feel too corporate for me, which was what I was trying to run away from. And also I realized while working there that I really enjoyed speaking to the artists and really learning about their works. And so I started to think about, maybe opening my own gallery, and sort of joining, working in the art world in that sphere, which I did with William Lorry in 2011. So we found the space, we started talking about it. William was at Christie's. He had also done a number of auctions focusing on the Middle East. We both felt that there was so many artists who should be showing in Dubai, but were not. At the time, there were a handful of art galleries, but we felt there was a lot more space for more, and also different kinds of artists. A lot of the galleries were focusing mostly regionally. So, for example, there was a gallery that was focusing exclusively on Syrian artists. Ayam Gallery predominantly started off working with Syrian artists. In fact, they moved from Damascus. And then the scene was it didn't feel as wide in scope as it could be. And especially for a city that was feeling more global and cosmopolitan like Dubai, we felt that there could be a niche that we could fill commercially. So we opened in 2011 with a show by Nabil Nahas, who's a very celebrated, quite well-established Lebanese painter based in New York. We will be showing him actually at Frieze Masters next month with his works from the 1970s. So he's an MFA graduate and very much part of the New York art scene since the 70s. So it'll be a very interesting exhibition. But we started off with him, and then and then sort of continued to build a program. I want to just step back as well and talk about Al Sakal Avenue, because the Al Sakal of today is very different to how it was. And I think we want to talk about audiences. And when we moved to Sakal, we took the space in 2010, and then we opened in 2011. And it was quite accidental. Al Sakal today is known as a cultural center. It's got, I think, 70 spaces, but there are about 13 art galleries. But when we moved in, we were the 4th gallery to move in. And this area was a selection of warehouses. So there were car repair shops, storage facilities, and sort of scattered amongst them were these art galleries. There were also some galleries outside, but we were all in an industrial zone. The good thing about it was that although it's an industrial zone, the city had grown so much that actually it was in the middle of the city. So it's a bit like saying you live in South Ken and El Cercal is across the river or something. So it was sort of very close to a very nice residential area, and you would just cross over a bridge, and suddenly you would be in this industrial zone. Actually, probably more like Chelsea into sort of Battersea. So it's a bit like that. You could sort of, people who were collecting and had these big, nice houses, it was very easy for them to access. Although at the time there was no Google Maps, so most of our time we were sort of standing outside, flagging collectors as they were trying to find where we were, and being on the phone most of the time, giving directions. Luckily, things have changed, and El Cercal, who's the owner of these spaces, cottoned on to this sort of movement that was happening. There were these galleries opening and all of that. And so he hired a lady called Vilma, who sort of made it more of a scene and sort of brought everyone together and was like, what else do we need here? And we were like, well, we'd love a coffee shop. There's nowhere to eat. And before we knew it, they built an extension. And this then added, 35 more spaces. And today, they're involved, I think, as Munira said, they've got a foundation, they do programming, there's public arts, there's coffee shops, restaurants, Pilates studios. It's a kind of buzzing warehouse, sort of edgy district in Dubai, which a lot of people are quite shocked with because, Dubai is known to be quite a lot more glamorous. But actually, when people come here, it's like, wow, this is like, it's like Brooklyn or something. So our second show was Shahpur Puyan, who was an Iranian artist, and the audiences during that period and the collectors and the artists were predominantly from Iran. So Dubai was kind of like a place where a lot of Iranians were living, and a lot of artists were able to show their works here, and Iranians were able to collect, kind of like reclaiming their culture in many ways. And a lot of the galleries were showing predominantly Iranian artists. And that was kind of our market to begin with. But we didn't want it to be that. We wanted to be a lot more diverse. And I wanted to show a lot more Arab artists and a lot more artists from North Africa, just to make it different to the other galleries. And so we continued with this in 2015. We also have another Iranian artist, Farhad Ahrania. And in the meantime, we were sort of showing other artists from Tunisia, etc. A lot of our clients at that point were outside of Dubai, and it felt like we were in this kind of bubble where we were doing a lot of international art fairs, especially in the US. So like Dallas, Armory, Miami, we were constantly flying to fairs and building our client base outside of Dubai. And the gallery was just a springboard to show exhibitions and bring in the artists. And there wasn't a big market, and there was no way I think any of the galleries would have been able to sustain commercially without having these outside art fairs. So these fairs were really our bread and butter for many years. But it felt sort of like we were in this kind of vacuum, and I felt like, well, this isn't really like, what's the point then of having a gallery in Dubai? We've got to be more involved in what's happening in here. And there was a Sharjah biennial, and things was, as Munira was showing, was starting to pick up. So I became sort of fixated on a mission, at least to start to discover Emirati artists. This is another show. I'll get back to that later. Some other shows. So in 2014, I visited, and ironically, it was a grad show in London, but I was accompanied by Sheikha Al-Mazrour, who had just graduated from her MFA. And somebody in London, I bumped into another artist, and we were talking about artists in UAE. And I was like, I just wish I could, I need to do more studio visits. And she was like, oh, well, Sheikha's graduating from Chelsea. Why don't you go and see her next week? So we go, and I thought her works are absolutely fabulous. She's a sculptor, and I think she's incredibly smart, and we really got along. And so we immediately signed her up because I thought that she had an incredible potential, although she was still quite young. But her works were very mature, and yeah, she was great. So she had her first exhibition with us in 2019. It took a while. We showed her at fairs, and then she had twins, so she was very busy. She also teaches at Sharjah University, so it took a couple of years before we did a full-on solo with her. But it was a completely fabulous and really successful breakout show, and she's really gone on to great heights. And it's been a real joy working with her, seeing that. In 2022, we showed this at Frieze. It's her sculpture Red Stack, and she's just gone on to all sorts of exciting things. We then started to work with Mohammed Ahmed Ibrahim, who was a much more established Emirati artist, who was working with another gallery who closed down. And at the time, I had literally just met him at a Sharjah Biennale dinner, and he was like, "Oh, I don't know, I think my gallery is not going to be running anymore." And I was like, "Well, I've always loved your works, let's work together." So we did, and he had his first show, The Space Between the Eyelid and the Eyeball, in 2019. He works with paper mache. He's a painter, and he does also a lot of public art. Really, his works originated from land art. So he lives in Khorfakan, which is a coastal village, and a lot of his work is created through meditations into these sort of rocky mountains that sort of surround the sea. So you have the sea, the land, and then sort of the background is the mountains. And so you can see, for example, in this image, there are these bottles that he's covered in paper mache. These are sort of water bottles that he picks. And so I really like his sort of connection to the environment that he has. Khorfakan, it's a very sort of sleepy village. It's not as built up as Dubai, and it's a very different feel. And there was something, I think, that also Munira touched on, like looking to the past. And he was someone who's really, connected to the land in a very different way. So I really sort of like his practice and how he operates within the UAE art scene, what he has to offer. In 2022, he represented the UAE in the National Pavilion, with I think over 120 of these sculptural works, which are sort of based on trees that you see, and also the color of the light in Khorfakan, because it's on the mountain. There's a mountain. You never see the sunset, so he only saw sunsets once he left his village, and so a lot of his work is also about that experience when you first see the beautiful light. There was another development that was happening in the last few years, which is public art. So 10 years ago, it wasn't really something that anyone was that interested in. And obviously these are top heavy, right? So these would have to come from government or big developers. And we always felt like, well, what a shame that, we have these sculptors and they can't make big works. Well, right now we're just sinking in public art commissions. We're fortunate in that we have a lot of artists who can work in that way. And I'll just show you a few here. I think the first sort of really exciting art commission that Sheikha and Mazroor did was Expo, the work on the left, Expo 2020. That was produced during a lockdown in Italy. It was extremely stressful. Eventually, Expo was in 2021. So there was a lot of delays and uncertainties around the project. But it came through in the end, and it's a marble sculpture with her sort of well-known, if you remember the image from her school from the grad show, she was also using the yellow bands. So she kind of returned to that in this piece of work. Recently, we had Rend Abdel Jabbar in Al Ula, Desert X Al Ula. With every edition, we've had one of our artists showing there. What we've done is we've sort of done a lot of research locally. on who can produce artworks and manufacturers and sort of fabricators. So we've kind of become a bit specialist in that. And then Islamic Biennale, Shahpur Puyan, Expo 2020, again on the right, there's Hamra Abbas. This, if you see closely, there's a man standing at the bottom. It's a fabulous marble inlay piece on the floor.
Sorry,
Sorry.
you just a couple more. Thank you.
1 minute. And then so after all of that, we're like, what's next? And the feeling was that we're working with Emirati artists, but there's also, I'm an expat, William is an expat, and what are the expats working on, or the people who are living here long-term, short-term, but not really from here. So we recently signed on Rand Abdul Jabbar, who is an Iraqi artist based in Abu Dhabi. And then Augustine Paredes, who is a Filipino based between Dubai and Berlin at the moment, but he's been working in Dubai for many years. And so that became a very important thing as well to bring in, how do we engage more people from the community who are working as artists? And yeah, it's been a journey in that respect. So that's that, yeah. I didn't have time to talk about all our other shows, but I just wanted to where is it?
Thank you so much. That was an incredible insight into the developing.
It's very fast.
No, but you've seen things develop, and you've shown that so beautifully. Thank you very, very much. Now, I think we'll have a few questions. If you'd like to switch your cameras on, Munira, Manal, and microphones. I think possibly the best thing to do, I've had some questions offline and some questions on the Q&A. Please do feel free to add to those. I'm going to start off asking you each a couple of questions that are burning for me, that I hope that everybody watching this will also find interesting. Starting with Manal. You showed us incredibly how it was great to show the connection between the UAE, well, Sharjah, the UAE, and the rest of the world. You showed that beautifully through museums and all the work, the projects that you're doing. Could you tell us a little bit more about the connections, particularly because of this art history festival, between local and global?
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about is focus on a particular region or on one thing or the other, but there's really not a conversation about how all of these things are connected. And of course, so much of it is. I think what we lack is often the understanding or the right curatorial expertise or the platform to allow artists to experiment and actually be here sometimes to create works where there is this conversation between their practice and what they are experiencing, maybe in their residency here or in the work that they do and how it relates to something that is very also another issue or a commonality between them. Where that has happened, I think Sharjah Art Biennial by the Sharjah Art Foundation does that excellently. Sheikh Hur Al-Qasimi has been instrumental in bringing artists from all over the world to come to Sharjah, but really look at Sharjah and look at the UAE and look at the historical context of many different issues, whether that's colonialism or it's the environment, or it could be about, gosh, let me think of past ones, so many things. And how you can look at these different concepts and ideas and conversations and then discuss them or think about them through either new commissions or through the artworks and the art that those different artists produce, and bringing it here as well. Yeah, makes it relevant and seen in a different way. I can't tell you what it's like to see a work somewhere else and then see it here, but it's a completely different feel in a different context and a different reaction because of what it's saying to a different community here or a different historical context here. And the other thing I'll just lastly mention is that trying to make it global is also saying that, all these amazing Arab artists, even as Esma mentioned, some of them, have practiced or grew up in other countries forth. I mean, the story of the Arab world in general, so much migration back and forth, sadly, often because of refugee status. But, you know, people have moved around so much, and they have these experiences, and they are unique and they are interesting, and they do have this sort of global outlook in many ways. And I think bringing it here and discussing that and seeing that, and also seeing what makes some of these artists really rooted in their Arab origins, or in their you know, maybe very strong sort of, let's say, art activism about particular things, is really important. So we've been able to kind of juxtapose that a lot as much as possible with the different types of programs and exhibitions that we choose. And then, of course, with other entities and other organizations, they do that really with the curators and the people they bring. Yeah.
I remember seeing the Jamil Art Prize at the V&A in the Museum of Islamic Art, which Islamic Civilization, which was incredible.
Great example.
Now, on the subject of local and global, Munira, you spoke about correcting narratives and asked lots of really important about that. What, in the spirit of the kind of local global narratives that you were correcting were perhaps regarding the Western kind of axis of kind of the narrative that we have been taught in regards to art history. But do you feel that you're also needing to redress some local ears as well, or maybe local perceptions of art or
of course, I think, like, you know, of course, at the scale the art is going now, there's a huge audience of the arts is enforced within schools, within public schools, you know, just really focusing on the space. So I think the role of the institutions that exist on the ground, you know, they have a big role, and the question of accessibility is key. You know, I talk a lot about this idea of like invisible boundaries or invisible barriers that don't really allow some people into this building or into this space because the building's intimidating or it's not what they're used to. So how do we kind of erase that invisible boundary and really be accessible? What is that question? And I think that that's a question that revolves around locality. You know, I think when you are bringing in international international artists, you're bringing in artists that are not perhaps relevant, or they cannot relate to the communities that exist within the UAE. You know, the Emirati person is diverse. There's a lot of different kinds of Emiratis, in the same way that there's a lot of different kinds of people that have migrated and have lived in the UAE and called it home. You know what I mean? So I think I really do think about this question of global, because generally when we discuss this idea of a global narrative, it is from the Western lens. So that is the gaze that, for me, I feel needs to be kind of balanced out.
See that actually in the kind of exhibitions that you had. I moving a little bit in the sense of looking at the kind of the visible, the invisible kind of boundaries. Asma, you gave us such a roller coaster of changing visual culture kind of. But it was fascinating, and I wondered. You showed the changes of Al Sarkal. You showed the changes of how gradually public art, whereas before perhaps they were just very traditional public art, or was it a kind of images or things in the street, and then how now there's a greater amount of public art, and I just wondered what in the future, if it was what are the aspects that people are becoming increasingly interested in now that you see becoming more important in the coming years for Laurie Shabibi?
Yeah, I mean, that's my last two clips were the artists who are living here, who are, who are, like Munira said, that it's their homes, but they're not necessarily Emirati. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that as well. Artists moving here. I met recently an artist, very, very good artist, actually, a known artist who's just moved here from London. And she had a small room in Tate, which is where I met her, and so one of those artist rooms. And so I think more people are moving here, and so I think we're going to have a lot more sort of artists working and living here. But I think as the museums come up, you're going to have a whole new level of people visiting as well. And so in terms of tourism, we very rarely, I mean, we've had people walking into the galleries who are on their way to Hong Kong or Maldives, and I think there'll be more of that happening once the Guggenheim is up, the Zayed National Museum is up. There'll be a lot more places for people to be visiting, and I think this will be a stopover. And so I expect that there'll be sort of new audiences, more and more global.
So going from local to global.
Yeah, so I think so. And so we're bringing local and global kind of together. It's a bit like me and Will, our characters. I always say that, you know, we're kind of East-West. You know, he learned Arabic and Islamic art at university. And so we're both kind of like very interested in the Middle East, but for very different reasons. But we also are very much enmeshed in a London kind of culture as well. So I think we bring that here. We do a lot of work with artists in London as well. So we feel that's also close to our hearts. And yeah, we spend a lot of time there too. So we're trying to bridge the two. Yeah, I don't know.
Really looking forward to seeing Nabil Nahas at Frieze and Frieze Masters.
Yeah, and also we're taking, you know, I think there'll be more showing Emirati artists at fairs. Like now at Frieze, it just opened yesterday, Frieze Sculpture. We have Muhammad Ahmed Ibrahim, 2 works of his were commissioned for Frieze Sculpture.
Work behind you.
And that's one of his works. So there's a large scale 2.5 meter sculpture, 2 of them in the park. It just opened yesterday, so I don't have the images of that. So yeah, it's always this back and forth, bringing artists here, taking artists out, bringing them here, taking them out. We're looking now at we'll have 2 African artists in 2025. Again, that's a lot of you know, it's a global city. There's a lot of African collectives. There's a lot of interest. So we'll be doing that too. So.
I better get on to the questions. I've got quite a few
it's
questions.
A fast-paced city, so it changes very quickly.
No, it is, absolutely.
The people change very quickly as well. Yeah.
Yes. I you know, I have questions here. I'll do the first one first. Arts Campus in Abu Dhabi, and they said we would love to hear more from Manal and the art and the audience strategy that drives the audience building programs. I assume it's within Sharjah.
So the audience strategy. Well, yeah. Quick comment about public art. It's great that there's been so many commissions, and I should make it also very evident that the Sharjah Biennial pretty much is a lot of public art projects, and it's been so for many years. And I think every emirate has a different audience that's building in a different way, and so they're really not the same. Actually, they're quite different. But I think what's wonderful about it is that we actually have all those different levels and those different components that together make a very, very rich artistic scene and an audience type of engagement, and strategies for engagement very different depending on, you know, what is attracting more people, whether it's people who want to buy art, people who are tourists, people who are, you know, Arab families as opposed to expat families, et cetera, et cetera. So there's, you know, there's overlap, of course, but I'm outside in public spaces, and it connects to what Munir mentioned earlier about trying to make things less intimidating. You know, these are works that you will encounter because they're a performance, they're a sculpture, they might be whatever it might be, a music piece that you will just come across as you wander through the neighborhoods of Sharjah. And that makes Sharjah also unique because our museums are placed within these neighborhoods rather than in a particular district or in a particular island. And I think that can change also the audience as well. So we often have an audience that is probably a little harder to strategize for because they come from everywhere. They're not necessarily coming from in a car to us. They're actually walking around. They're actually coming out of their house. They're actually watching sometimes the films from their balcony of their residential building, where SAF, for example, Sharjah Art Foundation, puts on public films. So it's a very interesting mix. But I would say our strategy has always been what His Highness said to me from the beginning. He said, it upsets me that when I go abroad and I go to museums in the UK and other places, it's filled with families with their kids. But here I don't see that. And we need to that's what I need to see. I want to see families feeling like the museum is theirs, and all those barriers that you mentioned are removed. And this is why all our museums are either free or completely nominal. I mean, you pay a couple, $2, $3 to enter. So financially, that barrier has been removed. Intellectually, we try to remove that barrier by making things more accessible through how they can understand the works, the way we talk about the works or don't talk about the works. So you can kind of decide how you want to interpret things, but also all the programming. We have so much programming that's there to help younger people, older people, and together, understand and appreciate an art form or an idea or a concept or a theme that's being addressed. And I think the other part is really looking at how we can ensure that we do not forget our priorities as much as we care about tourists and other people.
Absolutely.
Oh,
I wonder what
so
gallery he
many,
went into
so
in
many,
England, because I think we're seeing a lag in
No.
numbers now, and it seems as if you might have caught up and surpassed us
for
in terms
sure.
of
He had
museums are having.
He is constantly going to museums. He's been to, every museum I can possibly imagine multiple times. But
Yes.
I know that what he would have seen would have been just families having a fun day out. And that's not what was the audience before. And that's actually why I should say, when we first started, we used to go to shopping malls and we used to have workshops there. And we used to tell people, if you also want to have a fun day out, you can come to the museums, because there's no point having all these programs in the museums if no one knows about them. Because they don't think of a museum as a fun place to go to. So it was going out a lot. It was establishing Arabic and English programming. That sounds like a no-brainer, but that was actually a problem. Some places had only Arabic, some places only had English. So we were like, we have to do both. We have to also provide for different types of groups that don't want to feel that they're isolated or that they are put in a special group for, this is for people with hearing impairments. No, if we can make the program, the workshop for everyone, that's the ideal situation. So we have been really good at trying to increase our ability to really think about families, intergenerational groups coming, mothers, grandparents, kids, and then schools, of course, to really enhance their learning experience, which Munira also mentioned again.
Yes, no, you've done an incredible job, and I know that people working in Sharjah museums are all ambassadors to these ideas, and they're all.
And we have a mini ambassador program actually.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
So they can learn.
It's incredible. No, but you've done such a great job in taking these ideas and making them passionate about it and in training. I'd better get on with some more of these questions. We have a question from Ben Gordon. I think was probably reading through it. It was probably aimed at Munira, in the sense that he said that you describe how many different museums, galleries, collectives, government organizations, and other arts stakeholders are present in the UAE. As this ecosystem has expanded in recent years, are there new challenges
definitely to that question, I can tackle it. I think via a lot of the talks that I do a lot of public speaking, and I get a lot of these questions, that come in with hurdles that different creatives are going through. I think there's one thing that needs to be set as the most important, from my opinion and from what I've gathered from people hearing, which is sort of really setting the foundational terms of like legal things, you know, just the formalities, the not fun stuff within the art world, you know. It's just, you know, you know, looking at contracts, understanding the role of these things for artists and various creatives, questions around pay, questions around now you can get visas as a creative to come into the UAE, you know. So I think it's that's where we're at right now. I guess those would be the kinks that need to be ironed out in the next few years to really just give people that safety as well. You know, you need to have the infrastructure set. And I believe that we are on our, you know, on our way on that front. There's a lot that has been set, but you know, it's a growing industry, so there needs to be a lot more things to formalize. I'll give you an example. When 2020, when I started Darwaza, I needed to, you know, to get a license, and I'm explaining to the guy what I do, and it's just like a blank face, you know, and oh. And he goes through his clicker thing and list of things, and he's like, so you're an interior designer. I was like, no, actually, I'm a curator. It's very different. He's like, there's no curatorial status on this pull down menu, you know. So the closest thing at the time was this. So interior design. So, you know, you end up having to make just decisions because this is what's available. But these things are now being addressed slowly but surely.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. A final question. It was, I think, to everybody, but I'm going to ask, particularly, I'm going to ask Asma because I know that she really wanted to hear your answer to this. It's from Soraya Shaheen, a photographer and co-founder of Tank magazine, photography magazine, and she said, yes, she said, of the three panelists are at the top of their game, and looking back at what you now know at this stage in your career, Asma, what would you have done differently?
Oh gosh, you know,
Just a
quite
quick
honestly, what would I have done? I don't think I would have done anything differently. It all kind of fell in place. Maybe been a bit less stressed about how things were going to end up, you know.
Well, that is a wonderful way of looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's stress, but also sometimes I think, my God, thank God I didn't know that, because I would never have done this. You know, it's very difficult running a gallery and a business, and you know, so many different things that you're juggling, an artist, the collector, the funding, you're so many things. At one point I was doing all the social media. I mean, it's a small business at the end of the day, and so it's better not to know. So yeah, I think just be optimistic. Yeah,
and some wonderful things happen by chance, don't they?
Yeah, so it kind of just happened. I don't know, it does. And you know, my kids who are starting their careers now, I'm like, don't worry, because you may not be doing what you're doing now, but whatever you are doing, you're learning from. Even if you don't like it, why don't I like it? You know, moving on to the next thing. So I think it just worked out how it did, to be honest. I don't have any regrets about anything. I don't wish I'd studied art history, or, you know, okay.
Well, with that inspiring thought.
And sorry, the Art History Festival.
Yeah,
you know, sometimes I'm not an art historian, and I don't, you know, proclaim to be. But I
have drifted towards
my legal training was extremely helpful. Yeah, so.
Well, as I say, with that inspiring thought, I think I'd better draw this event to a close. So much to all of our panelists. It just remains for me to thank you so much for attending this this discussion, and thank you to the speakers, Manal, Asma, Munira. Thank you very much.